And here we go.
All right.
Welcome to Jaws Christ Talk Special. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Christ Talk Special, September 23rd. Today we have Justin Tarr with us. Justin is my grandson, but he is also has graduated with a degree in theology, and he digs deep into different Christian things that are going on, and he does a lot of word study, and he's really interesting to find out different things that he's brought up. And I think you're really gonna like the show today. It's called Christianity is an Uncompromising, Intolerant Religion. Okay? So, special thanks to Wingate TV, Transform U Media, Zach with Pack Channel, and Jay Stoyan with the Disability Channel for hosting our shows. Please be sure to subscribe to our page or wherever you found this. Now, let's get going on the show. Um, I thought that was very interesting. We also have a blog written about exactly about what we're talking about that is found on our website. Justin and I both write apologetic articles at Two Measures Foolish. Um, hey, Justin is the one that came up with the name Two Measures Foolish. Why did you name our apologetic website Two Measures Foolish?
So the name is a play on the idea that we are foolish because we sin, and then we are also foolish because the cross is foolishness to the world. And so we are foolish in two different ways. We are two measures foolish.
Very good. Um, so today it's very interesting. Yeah, come to our website and you'll see a link to not only this podcast, but other podcasts that I've had with Justin and some other people in the past. So go there to that website there for that. You can also go to Jaws Coffee Chat to find the different links to that. I hope you find this very interesting. Um, Justin wrote a blog, actually a cause called Christianity is Uncompromising, Intolerant Religion. And then his first paragraph was diametrically opposed to Christianity and God are the concepts of tolerance, compromise, and pride.
Hmm.
Can you explain that for me?
Yeah, so it is sort of what the rest of the article is about, but it is tolerance, what we understand as tolerance, what we understand of compromise, and of course, pride, are all against the way that God tells us to live our lives. And I mean, I hear this all the time that, we need to be tolerant of one another, that we need to have pride in our work, and, oh, I'm so proud of you, or, we need to compromise. I remember I once told someone when I was about to get married, that I believed compromise was a sin, and I don't think we should not be compromising. And then there's like, well, you're about to get married, right? And I said yes, and they told me, well, good luck with that sort of mentality in your marriage. And I was like, okay, and so far so good. It's been, I've been doing great, I think, without compromising, because I don't think compromise is what we should be doing. Um, it, it's it's not right to compromise. I think there is a better way of coming to mutual understandings and agreements uh, than compromising. Built within compromise is the idea that, you're not coming to a complete satisfaction in the arrangement, if you will, between two individuals. You're compromising. Both people are giving up something and getting something out of it. But you don't really, no side is totally fulfilled and happy. Um, and so I think ultimately these various concepts of what we're trying to get across are bastardizations of real virtue. And so in many ways, we have taken vices and turned them into virtues, given them new names, new brandings, and said that these are our new virtues. And so that's what the rest of the article is about. For example, tolerance is a rebrand of patience, right? We rebranded what used to be patience and long suffering and forbearance, and we've rebranded as tolerance. In fact, inside of Ephesians 4:2, I have it here. Be humble, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. But if you, that's the NIV, if we were to bring up the ESV, then we would get, now I'm getting ads. If we were to bring up the ESV, for example, it would tell us with all humility, gentleness, and patience. And then if we bring up the NASB, then it's going to tell us, I just had it. If we bring up another verse, here it is, NASB, tolerance for one another. Some translations will turn that into tolerance. If you were to go and do like an actual study on that word, which is, I can't pronounce it. It is microthymia. I have it here. I have a little concordance here. And it's translated as patience, endurance, forbearance, steadfastness, perseverance. But some translations put it as tolerance, and that's wrong because we don't understand the difference between what being long-suffering, being patient with someone is, and tolerating someone. You know, if I told you, John, or Grandpa, because you're my grandpa, Grandpa, I'm being so patient with you. That's how I am. I'm patient with you. That comes off a lot differently than if I told you, Grandpa, I tolerate you. Like, right? Doesn't it just it sounds different because they are different because they're not the same concepts. And as I go in later in the article, and we can get to that if we want. Maybe I ought not to jump ahead too much, but the difference is an end goal with the two. That is where that is the difference between patience and tolerance.
Hey, before you go too far, what I hear a lot from people, Christian and non-Christian, is that you should not judge.
Mm-hmm.
All the time they say you should not judge. And that's wrong. And can you explain why that is wrong?
Yeah, so the verse that I oftentimes get thrown in my face by people, if you're doing it right, then you'll actually have them judge themselves. You'll ask them, have they ever lied? No. Oh yeah, I've lied sometimes. So you're telling me you're a liar, right? It's like, oh, well, have you ever stolen anything? Okay, so you're a thieving liar. And I've seen some pretty effective of evangelism like that, to show them, the x-rays, if you will, before they show them like that they need Christ, because the law shows us we're sinful. Well, that's not necessarily accurate in terms of judging other people, right? So Jesus, a lot of times people will quote Matthew 7:1, right? When he's talking in the Sermon on the Mount, judge not that you be judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it'll be measured to you. So Jesus is basically Jesus's point is, don't be a hypocrite. Right? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye while there's a log in your eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, then you'll see clearly. Don't take a speck out of your brother's eyes, right? Don't give to. So that sounds great. Okay, good. Don't be judgmental. Don't be a hypocrite. And then afterwards, the very next verse he gives is, don't give to dogs what is holy, and do not throw pearls before swine, lest they trample you underfoot and turn to attack you. So let me ask you, Gramps, how do you discern whether or not someone is a dog or whether or not they're swine without judging them?
Exactly.
It's really humorous to me that people, who don't read their Bible, don't understand their Bible, will go in and they'll, take some verse out of context. And because they don't read literally one verse after their point, after Jesus's point, the very next verse is, which contradicts their interpretation of it. It just goes to show. I mean, there's a verse that says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. Well, if I take verses out of context, I can prove with the Bible that there is no God, because I can just say, look, the Bible says right here, there is no God. Bam, done it, proved it.
Yeah, right.
It's really important to contextualize what is being said. And yes, there are examples of Paul talking about, if you break one of the law, you've broken all the law. And but the main thrust of it is don't be a hypocrite. And you got to judge rightly. You got to make sure that what you're doing, if you want to go and talk to people about their sin, you can't be committing that same sin. You can't be committing adultery and having, you can't have two families or something while you go up and tell people that lusting after women is bad. Right? And so it's really important to maintain a purity of oneself. That's why it's so important that we be holy as he is holy. That's quoted all around in Leviticus over and over and over again. And then that's reiterated in the epistles of Peter, by John. It's said all over in the New Testament and the Old Testament to be holy. That is what God expects, is holiness. And holiness is not just moralness. Ground, inanimate objects can be holy, right? Moses had to take his sandals off, his shoes off, because he stood on holy ground. Well, it's not like the ground makes moral decisions. And so, holiness is a wider concept than just moral purity. It's that's why we can be sinners, and we can have sinful bodies, yet we can be holy as he is holy, because it's more than just moral purification.
Right. It's their lack of understanding what the Bible's talking about when it comes to judging. Because if we did not judge situations or people or things around us, we would never understand anything. And it's almost like this real liberal thing of don't judge.
Don't judge.
But in reality, it's telling us. Go ahead.
I was just agreeing with you. I mean, it's absolutely the case. It reminds me of when Jesus says, if you call someone raka, if you call someone a fool, then you're in danger of hellfire. Well, then I guess Paul is in danger of hellfire because he called the Galatians you fools at one point in Galatians 3. And so it really comes down to what is the position of the individual saying those words? What is their authority? What is and part of that authority comes from what is their holiness? What are they holy? Are they living their life in accordance to Jesus' commands? John says, if we don't keep his command, if we don't keep his commands, then the love's not in us. If Jesus tells them, if you love me, keep my commandments.
Right. Very interesting.
And you don't tolerate someone who's going to hurt people you love, right? Nobody is going to just stand idly while some stranger goes and beats their child. If they are, then they don't love that child. If the fear is holding them back, then their fear is stronger than their love for their child, because love motivates, and it's also love that causes us to hate. God hates things much more than me, you, or anyone else in this world. God hates more than Satan hates, and Satan hates a lot. God hates more than anything sin, and he hates it so intensely, and that's because he loves so intensely. He cannot stand when he sees the things he loves being tarnished by sin, and that's why he hates it so much.
Kind of going back to what you said about Christianity as an uncompromising, intolerant religion.
Mm-hmm.
Almost all religions are uncompromising and intolerant if you go in and really study them. You can go to Buddhism, you can go to other religions, and they say, if you really dig into what they're talking about, they pretty much say they're the only way. But Jesus himself said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Mm-hmm. Now, that statement is very uncompromising and intolerant, and very judgmental, too. But he is God, and Jesus Christ was God. And he had to, so we could reconnect with God after the fall. with Adam and Eve and all of that,
Mhm.
he had to make himself a sacrifice, which was himself.
Mhm.
And that's why he said what he said. And if you go through the Bible and all the different things that Jesus Christ himself said about himself, it was very uncompromising and intolerant. And
Mhm.
that's why the Jewish leaders had such a hard time with him. And they ripped their cloak away from him because they realized that he was talking that he was God himself.
Yeah.
So, and that very uncompromising and intolerant. Um, I remember watching on TV The Chosen when the reenactment when they were with Jesus when he was going up to talk to them, and I could feel it coming in the program that Jesus was going to have this situation. But it was also when at the beginning of his ministry when he was talking to them in the very beginning of who he was and he was preaching. But I was almost like, in my heart, I was almost like, oh no, don't do it. you're gonna you're gonna ruin the day. And but that's exactly what he had to do. He had to start his ministry off on that foot and
Mhm.
say, hey, the scripture says, here I am. And he said, and he looked around and he said, here I am. So, I just find it uncompromising and tolerant. So that's exactly what he was, and he had to be because there's no other way. God had, from the very beginning of the foundations of the planet, that
Mhm.
this is how it was going to unfold, and Jesus Christ, a part of Him, who was
Mhm.
there when He made everything, was
Mhm.
going to have to come down to the earth, God in the flesh, and have to deal with this. But I
Mhm.
just could see, knowing full well what he was going to have to say and the pushback that came from not just the Jewish leaders, but a lot of other people too. How was that going to play out? How was that going to deal with it? But he had to do it, and he had to pull the trigger at some point to
Yeah.
get it rocking and rolling.
He knew
And
he
to
was
really get it rocking and rolling, he judged the people that were selling the different indulgences and sacrifices and stuff to be given at the temple, and he knocked over all the tables and stuff like that. He didn't say it, but he was telling him by his actions that he was intolerant. You know what I'm saying? And he was judging them. So
Mhm.
um, you also said through this here, um, as with all totalitarian regimes, utilizing linguistic sleight of hand is a prerequisite to the valued achievement of complete societal control.
Yes, the vaulted.
Anybody, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just all totalitarian regimes seek to take control of the language. It's always what they do. And George Orwell talks great about this. He talks about how they call it the Ministry of Truth, right? They'd go in and they'd update history, and they would unperson someone, and we have all of this today now. We have our own unpersoning systems. Just recently with Russell Brand, they tried to basically unperson him without it, just off of some accusations. They are going through and demonetizing and cutting out his sources of income, and then it came out a couple days later that the UK government was behind a lot of the push, when Rumble released a letter that they did. And so we've been doing the exact same things of trying to go and unperson people and take control of language. And a lot of things is euphemistic language nowadays. Later on, I might be jumping ahead, but later on it talks about how we speak in very loving language with a lot of fluff in order to give out these really dark truths. Like we say things like uh, assisted suicide, right? When really it's just someone
Good point.
really just
Yes.
someone murder you essentially. And we used to treat it like that, but now there are assisted suicide programs in, like, say, Canada, and we call them doctors when they're not doctors. Doctors heal and bring life, but we call these abortionists who go and systematically slaughter just children, literal children, inside of the temple of God, performing a type of abomination of desolation, of killing God's own image inside of his own temple. And we call them doctors when really they're just priests of Baal, essentially, without even realizing it. And it's just all this euphemistic language. And I remember I went and got a peer support certification a couple years back, and they were talking about how different words and such have stigmas and such. And so now you were before the clinical term was retard, because that was just a clinical term. You were retarded. Then it became disabled, and now calling it disabled is considered just as bad as calling calling someone retarded. Now it's differently abled. And so it really just comes down to human beings not wanting to face reality, and invent their own reality that is more comfortable to maintain the status quo, because a lot of us have that continuation bias of just wanting things to essentially stay the same. People would rather have the devil they know than the devil they don't know, and I get that. I really do get that. But with that is the sort of essence of tolerance, is that you're maintaining status quo rather than bringing it to an end. And so a lot of times people can mistake, just like we talked about with the NASB translation verse of Ephesians 4:2 compared to NIV, KJV, all these other ones, is tolerance is being replaced, or sorry, patience is being replaced by tolerance. Tolerance is, I'm going to maintain the status quo for just as long as it is. This is just how it is. We live in a pluralistic, tolerant society where people believe different things, and you just have to tolerate those things, rather than a mentality of, we need to be patient with these people who believe the wrong way and lead as an example to bring them to our side, right? And a lot of times people use those interchangeably, not realizing that they are giving way to the wordsmithing that goes on a regular basis, that gets released by every new edition of the psychological elites, the people who work in all of these upper echelons of the psychology field, deciding what words are and are not
appropriate.
And then it also comes from the political elites too. Instead of women, now it is birthing people, right? And we just come up with new language to always change things, because from birthing person, you just get what does that tell you? Birthing person. We don't. I mean, instead of Mother's Day, we're gonna have birthing person's day. Instead of Father's Day, what are we gonna have? Like sperm contribution day? Like, where do we go from there? It's just preposterous, and it all comes down to the fact that Satan has his own ministry of truth. And there's one thing that Satan hates above all else, is the fact that he can't speak words without giving way to God, because God is the word. He is the logos, right? And so that's why he always tries to speak lies by either twisting scripture, taking words out of context, like, judge not, yes, don't judge, or God doesn't exist. He likes to take verses, and that's exactly what he did against Jesus too. And when he was in the desert being tempted, is turn, if you're the Son of God, turn these into whatever. And then Jesus always responded to Satan's misquotations of scripture with more scripture, putting it into its context. So there's a reference to one of the Psalms, I forget which one, where it's like, the angels will catch you, right? When he was tempted to throw himself off the temple, and then the angels will catch him, and that's when he tells him, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. And so that's what we need to do, is every time things are quoted from scripture out of context, because Satan knows that the most power is in the word, in the truth. So he's going to try to use the truth in a false way. He will resort to outright lying, though, but that's the best way he knows, is to take the
Right. And you also said
scripture back, that places it back into context.
you also said here, I thought this was very interesting. My grandson. This is why hot off Satan's printing press is the diabolical concept of white lies. Lies for the benefit of the deceived, charitable lies, lies that save rather than harm. Deception replaces honesty.
Yes.
I thought that was very receptive of you to point that out.
Yeah.
So it's a deception replaces honesty.
Yes, and so there's this, people always ask me, like, never lie, ever, never do it. You just don't do it. Doesn't matter what the circumstances. And then they always give like the, oh, if your wife looks fat in that dress, just like, no, you tell her she looks fat in the dress. Maybe you don't say it like that. You tell her,
Yeah.
I don't think that dress does you any favors. It might be a kinder, more compassionate way to do it, but you don't lie to her and say, oh no, you look great, hon. You still have to tell her she looks fat in the dress. And the reason for that is because you undermine her trust in you. So like I have that opinion for my wife, right? That, hey, if you're gonna look fat in the dress, I'll tell you to look fat in the dress, right? But my wife also has, because I'm that trustworthy and she knows that I tell her outright that truth and I won't BS her, then it also means that when when she was all labored out from having the baby and her hair is all floofy and all of that, and she thinks she looks horrible, and I look at her in the eye and I tell her, my gosh, you're so beautiful, I love you unconditionally, then she actually believes it. And the reason she actually believes it is she knows that I won't spare her feelings. And that's what's really important, because if someone's going to spare your feelings, then you can't ever trust them, because they'll never tell you the truth. Because if it hurts you too much and they have judged that you're too weak to handle the truth, then they won't be able to rely on you. And because of that, you harm the relationship that you would otherwise be able to have, instead of dealing with those problems when it's small, like, oh, something small like, oh, you look fat in the dress. I would have been dealing with it with something much more important, like the very stressful process of childbirth.
Right. Well, when they look like that, and we look like what we look like too, they love us. So they're not really looking at the looks like it, the way they looked or the way we judged them in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
It really has to do with how we think of them now.
Yeah, it's their heart. God only sees the heart, but the closer you learn to someone, the more you get glimpses of it. God shows you those glimpses. And I know my wife has a new heart because she's saved. And so I can get glimpses of her beautiful heart. And I love her more now than I did then. And, I love her more every day. And that's because, I'm honest with her and she's honest with me. And that's what's very important. We can't allow ourselves to fall into the trap of believing that we can sin for a greater good. As C.S. Lewis talks about, that is the essence of evil, is always doing something evil for the sake of some greater good. Even, something as horrible as, as the sexual assaults, is done for a good end, even, of pleasure, because pleasure is not bad. Sexual pleasure is not bad, but doing it in wrong, evil ways is bad. So all evil, as C.S. Lewis talks about in his book, Mere Christianity, all evil is a form of utilitarianism. God never acts utilitarian. He is a deontologist. Every act is good in and of itself. It doesn't matter what the end is. An act has to be good in and of itself. You can't lie for a greater good. And so there's
Justin,
no time.
I've got to stop you right there because at the 30-minute mark, we have a new sponsor, that is helping us promote and by helping us with money and finances and things like that. This is a company called Stanley, and they have all kinds of different things for food and liquid and all kinds of things. If you were going camping, they have a whole um, set of camping gear for cooking with, and then all kinds of stuff. Um, the Stanley brand is a rich 100-year history born from inventor William Stanley Jr., who forever changed the way hot drinks were consumed. In 1913, he fused vacuum insulation and the strength of steel in one portable bottle, inventing the all-steel vacuum bottle that we know and love today. In the century since, his vacuum bottle evolved from concept to icon and has become an essential part of workdays, road trips, and outdoor adventures. It is the most sustainable product of their kind and never need to be thrown away or replaced. Stanley has created reusable, built for life products for over 100 years, reducing the demand for disposable products that end up in waste and water streams. But it's not just about what we make. It's also about how we make it. Stanley is committed to sustainable practices across our entire supply chain from manufacturing to recycled materials and packaging. I would recommend that you go to their website and take a look at the different products that they sell. And they are really heavy duty and there's a thing that you can put food in.
We're supposed to eat.
And you can put food into it and travel anywhere, hiking or anything, and it stays hot for hours. So it's really cool. So when they're recommending and talking about what their product does. So it's Stanley Products. Okay, let's go back to Justin. And before I kick in too far here, I want to tell everybody that Alejandra, Justin's wife, both him and her, especially her, had a baby about a month ago. Has it been a month already since you had your little boy?
On Tuesday.
What is it?
I believe it's on Tuesday that we're at a month.
Okay. So tell us your little boy's name and why you picked out that name.
Actually, sorry. I think it's yeah. No. Yeah, on Tuesday. Sorry. No, sorry, it's actually 3 weeks on Tuesday. I'm sorry. We picked out the name Eliezer, and his name is Eliezer because the name means God is my help. And so I gave him that name because I want him to make sure, I wanted his name to reflect that he needs to rely on God.
Yeah. What a sweet little boy. He's my great grandson. And my wife was over at their house just the other day, and she was holding him. And she said, he is the sweetest baby I have ever seen or held in my arms. Of course, she said this with Justin when he was a baby, and Sean when he was a baby, our son. But they really are a gift from God, even when they're crabby. I was inviting Justin to bring on Eliezer, but he said he's in a really crabby mood today. So maybe on a future podcast we can bring him little self in, and maybe someday we could actually do a podcast where he's talking about his relationship with God too. And I hope that I hang around long enough to do that. This is a dream come true with me, to be able to interview my grandson about the things of God and finding out his perspective. I learn something every day. When Justin was small, we talked about apologetics and God, and then Justin just took off with it, and then eventually went to a college to get his theological degree. So I am blessed with Justin's presence in my life. So, and he holds my toes to the fire too. Okay, you said something in here that was also, you said at the back end of that, it said deception replaces honesty. I want to ask you a question. If you remember, like Schindler's List of the Nazi and the guy that was bringing people, the Jews, and he told some lies in there, white lies to protect his people. Is that what we're talking about here, those kind of white lies, or is this a different kind of a thing? Is it okay in a situation like that to protect? Obviously, if he would have told the truth, they would have found all the people and killed them.
Mhm.
But he had to lie to some degree to protect their place so they would survive. So let me ask you about that. That is a little bit of a white lie. Is that okay?
I would say that that is probably still considered a white lie. The reason they're called white lies is the idea is that you're lying for a good reason. So, compared to like say black lies, it's still the same idea of like white magic versus black magic. White magic's for good magic, and then you have black magic where it's bad magic, right? Have you even heard Jordan Peterson talk about black truths? Truths that if you tell someone, it's only going to harm them, so you withhold the truth from them. And there's nothing wrong with withholding the truth, but purpose, actively giving someone falsehood is not right. So I think God in this circumstance gives us an example of what we need to do instead, and that is give them a truth that is a misdirection. And we actually see this when Saul loses his throne. He falls out of favor with God. I believe it was Samuel, the prophet, or maybe it was Nathan, whatever the prophet was at the time, was told to go anoint David as king. And he tells God, well, if I go do that, and then Saul asks what I'm doing, then he's going to have me killed. Like that. What am I supposed to do, Lord? I can't do that. And I can't lie, right? And so God tells him, okay, fine. Then bring with you a sacrifice. And then when he asks you what you're doing, you tell him, I'm going to go sacrifice this animal over in this area. And then go and do that thing, right? So give him a truth that's true, and then just withhold the lie, or not the lie, withhold the truth, the greater truth that could get you in trouble. And so that I had to do an essay on this thing, and they were talking about this whole idea of deontology and whether or not to lie in truth. And almost everyone basically picked a side on whether or not you should just choose. And most of all of them fell on, unfortunately, on the position that they should lie. To my chagrin. And I was the outlier. I didn't pick a side. I said, no, this is a false dichotomy. This is not the way that reality is. There is always another option. God does not give you a choice between, delivering his people to death or breaking his law and speaking, lies. So that's just a false dichotomy from hell. That's my opinion on it, and that's my belief on it, and I think I can make a very strong argument for it, and I think I've made a pretty good argument so far. So my position is we should take a page out of God's book, give them a truth of something that's true that misdirects them. Misdirection is not the same thing as outright deception and outright lying to them. It's just giving them a truth that they aren't going to. Now, granted, if you do decide to go the way of lying, then God's going to at least look at your heart and see that you are at least trying to do the right thing, right? And we hear the thing of good intentions, or pathway to hell is paved with good intentions, right?
Right.
So he's going to know you're trying to do the right thing, even if you're a sinful, crappy human being who does wrong things all the time. Because as Isaiah says, even our righteousness is like filthy menstrual rags, right? And that's the actual. The KJV and other ones they hide it and say like filthy rags, but if you look at the Hebrew, it's filthy menstrual rags. Used tampons level type thing. But we need to we need to also know that God is graceful. Rahab is an example of someone who was in that exact circumstance that you're talking about with the Nazis, when Caleb and Joshua were inside of Jericho as the spies, right? And the people of Jericho heard about the Israelites, and they're like, oh, we hear some of these Israelites got sent in as spies. Do you have them, right? And Rahab lied to them and told them, oh, they already left and they ran down this road. And she told them to go basically the opposite direction. So they, a little, lynch mob went after them in the other direction. Meanwhile, Rahab lets him go and frees him on the other side. And as a result, Rahab and her house was saved. And Rahab would go on to become the grandmother of King David. So she entered the messianic line for her faithfulness to choose God over the people of Jericho. And she's mentioned in the book of Hebrews, Hall of Faith. So that should tell us, well, even though she did a wrong thing for a greater thing, God still looks at the heart for what it is that they would have liked to do, even if that person in their human limitation was not able to choose the thing that wasn't sinful. God still is going to judge you by your heart. That doesn't mean that what she did wasn't a sin.
Right. That was interesting that you brought that story up too, because the thing of it is she lived in that town or that city, and those were her countrymen. But she realized that the Israelites were a bigger truth that she was really wanted to be a part of, and she had accepted the God of Jacob, and realized that the Israelites were the true religion, and she was trying to protect them. Um, yeah, that's a good point you brought up, Justin. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Where else do we want to go with this now? You said
You're the interviewer.
where sacrifice once brought charitable one-sided payments toward the consensual unity that leaves both content, compromise presents itself as an open market towards a mere restless operation. Boy, that's a mouthful right there.
Yeah.
So can you take your toothpick out and point out what this
Yeah.
what you're trying to get at here?
Let me scalpel this a little bit. All right. So we have compromise, right? Compromise is where, I give a little, you give a little, we both walk away a little less happy than if we got everything we wanted, right? Well, that's why we're supposed
Right.
to be sacrificial, right? We're supposed to, instead of both of us being not as happy as we should, the picture that I read out of scripture, and I think the picture that Jesus is constantly showing us, is that we need to be self-sacrificial, right? We need to pour ourselves out. We need to take the suffering and pick up our cross for the sake of someone else, so that way they can have everything at our loss, right? Jesus poured out everything for his bride, just like Hosea, cleaned Hosea out. He had to pay all of his silver, and then he had to pay the rest of his price to buy his whore wife of Gomer back, with the rest of it in food, because it cleaned him out. That's what we're supposed to do, is pick up our cross daily, pour ourselves out completely. Sacrifice is where it needs to be. So instead of, with my marriage, right? No, oh, good luck, not compromising. It's like, no, it needs to be where one of us is sacrificing for the other, and appeasing them. And if we're both constantly sacrificing for each other, it's not a compromise. It's both of us giving everything to the other person. And in that way, just like with refusing to buy into the white lie idea, where we undermine our trust in each other for the sake of our feelings, and you make that moral compromise with truth, just like with actual compromise itself, because that's what it is. It's moral compromise with white lies, right? You're sacrificing something to get, at your own expense. That's why sacrifice is a morally charitable act. It's a morally what's the word, applaudable. It's applaudable to sacrifice. But you're not a better person for compromising. If anything, you're worse, because it shows that you're not that you're willing to leave things on the table. You're willing to you're not principled enough to stick to your guns, right? So that's what this is talking about, where sacrifice once brought a charitable, one-sided payment to consensual unity, right? Jesus paid everything to bring us to bring that unity, you know. And when we have disagreements, one of us is going to make a sacrifice on it. That leaves both of us content, right? Because someone who sacrifices willingly, not has a gun pointed at them and coerced to do it, or, you know, hell pointed at them and is coerced to do it, but no, is willingly sacrificing. Then both of us are content because, you know, I did it because I love you. I'm content with the decision I made because I love
Right,
you.
right, right.
Sacrifice. But if I compromise, well, you know, I can compromise with an enemy. You know, I can compromise with anyone. And so what it does is it turns relationships into a negotiation of, you know, in the same way we'd have an open market. And then it turns, you know, what's supposed to be a loving relationship of mutual self-sacrifice, it turns it into a an exchange of goods and services, and it commoditizes relationships.
Very good.
And you'll never truly be happy with that because you'll always want to renegotiate terms and services. And that's not what relationships are supposed to be. And that's not the way that God designed them to be. And you know, with that, when you know one person's willing to sacrifice everything for you and just drop drop what they want at a moment's notice, then you know that and you know the expectation is going to be on you to do it too, and you know you won't second guess whether or not you're willing to, because you know the other person would as well. Just like with the truth, you won't second guess if they're telling you the truth because you know they won't spare your feelings. So you know doing these things are always short-term gain, short-term gain, long-term payoff. Or sorry, short-term loss, long-term payoff. I once heard it. I don't remember who it was, but there was a lesson taught to an evangelist that anything you pay for in the beginning and then enjoy is good. Anything that you enjoy and then have to pay for afterwards as a debt is sin. And that's how it always is with all of these things. If you're willing to sacrifice, you're paying up front and then you're enjoying after the fact. You know, if you're willing to tell the truth, even if it hurts, you're paying up front, but the long-term gain is greater. But it's the other way, where you take the short-term gain of we have an agreement, but the long-term loss of, we don't have as much trust in each other. We don't have as much faith in one another as we otherwise could have. So it's all about being willing to what's that word? Like the marshmallow test, forego the immediate satisfaction of things.
Yeah, no kidding. You also said something that was interesting here too, closer to the end, and we are heading the last 14 minutes here. It says Christ and his church are hated because, like God, there is no tolerance of evil. Compromise is always unacceptable, and it cost Saul his throne and Solomon a united kingdom. And then you went on and you said the church of Thyatira will be left behind at the rapture to go to the great tribulation. People that know about the church of Thyatira, it's talked about in Revelation.
Mm-hmm.
And her tolerant of Jezebel and the Christians who turn their back to the law to finish their sanctification by the flesh will be under its curse. Compromise and toleration are the modus operandi of sin. That's pretty powerful right there. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about the Church of Thyatira a little bit? What were they? There were 7 churches, and they pointed out this one church right here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's pretty heavy. So go ahead, explain that.
So I'm very openly and unapologetically pre-trib, or at least pre-wrath, but I think pre-trib for much strong, definitely pre-wrath, but pre-trib I think is. Anyways, moving on. But the Church of Thyatira is specifically warned for tolerating Jezebel, who is teaching people to go towards sexual immorality and eating food sacrificed for idols. And that could be normal sexual immorality, just like going and sleeping around or doing whatever you do. But it could also, sexual immorality is typologically tied to idolatry and all forms of pagan and idolatrous worship of demons and, you know, the various sons of God who are not who are not to be worshipped, you know, various angels and the like. So she's specifically given the warning that he will cast her into great tribulation if she continues to tolerate Jezebel. Right? Jezebel was the wicked princess, or I guess queen, it would be better terminology, of who was married to King Ahab, who was one of the most wicked kings. Jezebel was the one who tried to have Elijah killed, and she was the sort of the high priest of Baal. And if you remember, Elijah had all of the priests of Baal put to death after their showdown, where Elijah called down fire from heaven after pouring water over his own altar. Right?
Right. Wow.
And so Jezebel is, you know, the same spirit that was on Jezebel is in the church of Thyatira, and it's a very dangerous spirit. It takes upon women and tries to, it's like that mentality. And we joke about it with like, where, you know, we joke about it in movies and such, like My Big Fat Greek Wedding, you know, the head, if the man's the head, then the woman's the neck, and turn him whichever way she wants, right? We joke about these kind of things, but, you know, Jezebel's someone who takes that very seriously and uses it to her own benefit, right? She doesn't want to be in charge. She wants to be in charge of the one who's in charge. She wants to be the power behind the throne, essentially. And you see that, I see that in churches a lot of times. And one really prominent example, especially in contemporary Christianity in America, is in yoga. Yoga is a Hindu liturgy. It'd be like Muslims taking the Eucharist, or Hindus, you know, taking the Eucharist and getting baptized in the name of Jesus, even though they, you know, openly say, oh, Jesus isn't God and it's all nonsense. But we're still going to do these things because, you know, I like the water, the feeling of the water on my skin, and I'm hungry and thirsty. And so they just go and profane all these things. That's how the Hindus look at it when Christians try to Christianify yoga, because it is so tied to Hinduism. It was actually created like alongside and parallel to Hinduism for their various practices. And the purpose of Hinduism, as far as I can tell and in my study, is the end goal of demonic possession. And so the various yogic poses are reenactments of the various Hindu stories of the conquests and such, and the exploits of various gods, which we know to be demons. So in other words, when people are doing quote Christian yoga, what they're doing is they're reenacting the stories and the exploits of demons in the name of Christ. You can't sit at the table of demons and the table of God. It's very, you know, and this all just comes down to compromise. It's called a religious syncretism. It's a very common form of religious syncretism in America, but it's just religious syncretism nonetheless. And we see these religious syncretisms everywhere. I mean, I think Catholicism, I personally think Catholicism is rife with religious syncretisms, but it all comes down to the same basic problem of compromise. We can't compromise.
Yeah, I agree with you here, Justin. I've thought about that, about yoga, Christian yoga especially, and a lot of churches actually have yoga classes. But I understand what you're saying about this. It's going through the motions of all these Hindu religion and all the things that represented as you go through it. If these people actually studied Hindu yoga and saw the parallels and what all these positions and everything mean, it is a really big deal.
Yeah.
You know,
And what's really scary is that they might incite what's called the Kundalini awakening, which is this basically demonic possession. And I've seen multiple instances where there's been you can see side by side what it looks like when someone is having a Kundalini awakening, and what you see in a lot of Pentecostal charismatic churches of the shaking around, just the various poses and the way that they're reacting. It's the exact same as a Kundalini awakening, and it's what we see with exorcisms and the like. It's because it's all the same thing. It's all just demonic possession, and it's a fake Holy Spirit. It's Satan's counterfeit of the Holy Spirit. He counterfeits everything. He counterfeits words. He counterfeits virtues. He counterfeits the Spirit. Someday he's going to counterfeit all of them in the great showdown when he pretends to be the Messiah.
There's a parallel. There's also a parallel in karate, kung fu, and I didn't get into kung fu. I got into taekwondo, and they were both very different. Kung fu has a lot of resemblance to a religion. That's just what it is. There, a lot of the practitioners of kung fu are considered priests, and whereas kung fu and kung fu came from China, but taekwondo came from Korea, but it has no connection to any religion at all. It's just a series of movements of punches and kicks and things like that. So it had no connection
I have a
to
friend.
religion.
I have a Christian friend who does martial arts, and he said that Taekwondo was made by a Korean prison inmate. I don't know how accurate that is, but I guess that's what he told me. So, but yeah,
there was
but yeah, I've heard that a lot of martial arts are basically religions, and so I don't know how far to push that. And I haven't done enough study to speak on it any more than that. I've heard that a lot, and Christians ought to do some research as to the root of whatever martial art they're learning before they go full bore into it, before they figure out exactly. They got to know what they're doing. It's important to know, and like we talked about, God knows your heart. If you do in ignorance, it's still a sin. Ignorance doesn't exempt you from breaking the law. There are multiple instances of people being punished for not. Me and my pastor disagreed on this, but there are instances of people being punished for sins they didn't know. One such example is Pharaoh, who took Abraham's wife Sarah, not knowing that it was his wife, because Abraham didn't he lied and said, oh, it's just my sister, and he withheld the fact that it was also his wife, which wasn't just a misdirection, because he by virtue of saying he was only his sister, then that means he lied to him, and it caused Pharaoh to to have plagues fall on his house, and he was pretty peeved off at Abraham for this deception. But it doesn't change the fact that Pharaoh was being punished for sins that he didn't know. So God still holds us accountable for the sins we don't know, and that's why Job sacrificed animals for his children for the sins that they didn't know. We need to ask for God for forgiveness on everything we did wrong, but also all the things we didn't even know we did wrong, because we're just so dirty that we're just going to do a bunch of things wrong. And that's why in my last paragraph, and this, it's say at the end of the day, we worship the truth, the actual truth, like what Platonism said is the truth. It's like of premises, the truth value of that premise, that like metaphysical truth, that metaphysical object that gives that essence, literally is a person, literally has autonomy and power. That literal truth, that metaphysical object, became flesh and then died on a cross so we can be saved. And at the end of the day, we just have to cling to that with all of our might. And there's no justification for sin.
I agree.
Because
you got to cling to it.
We got to cling
with
to
our culture, the way everything that's happening in the world, and with our culture the way it is, we got to just cling to God. And when we screw up, just confess it. And He is so faithful to tell us just to move on. Now, we're right at the end of it here. Yeah. I'm ending our show here. Justin, thank you for coming today. Love that little boy that you got and your wife, and we'll be doing this next month. Thank you, everyone who is here with us. Our next episode of Jaws Christ Talk special will be aired in October when Justin will be back with us. And be sure to subscribe to our channel page and wherever you found us, and check out our website to find out more about this and other shows. Until next time, we wish you a productive and enjoyable week. Goodbye. Thank you very much. Thank you, Justin. See you later.